So now we're going to be discussing the online beta version of the Haṭhapradīpikā, which Jürgen Hanneder here has been working on, and Ruth Westoby is going to discuss it with him. So Jürgen Hanneder is Professor of Indology at Philipps University Marburg in Germany. He studied Indology in Munich, Bochum, Bonn, Marburg, and Oxford, and worked on the Mokshopaya project in Halle. One of his focuses is the Sanskrit literature of Kashmir, but his interests are varied, and they span ancient Indian stele, which I'd like to know more about, lotuses, modern Sanskrit, as well as the history of Indological studies in Europe. Recent publications include an introduction to Sanskrit editing called To Edit or Not to Edit, and Sabib Kal's Tree of Languages. For the last 3 years, he's worked on the Anglo-German project called Light on Hatha Yoga, and hence our discussion of one of its outputs today, which is this critical edition of the Haṭhapradīpikā. Now, Ruth Westoby is due our very hearty congratulations for flying through her PhD Viva on Thursday. We're all very proud of her. Her thesis is a study of the body in early Hatha Yoga, which she did at SOAS at the University of London. She's visiting lecturer in Indian religions at Roehampton University, teaching postgraduate theory and method in the study of religion, and undergraduate courses on contemporary issues in global religions, as well as religion, ecology, and politics. She's a practitioner of Ashtanga Yoga, and in 2016 and 2017, she collaborated with the Hatha Yoga project's embodied philology by interpreting postures from the Haṭhabhyasa Padati, which is an 18th century text teaching a precursor of modern yoga. Thank you both very much.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. I considered changing my name to Doctor, but then thought I couldn't quite go that far. It hasn't sunk in yet. So no, I haven't. I'm absolutely delighted to be invited to engage with Jürgen on this extremely important piece of work. So perhaps I'll say a few words and then we can go into more of a discussion. So yes, we're here to discuss the online beta edition of the Haṭhapradīpikā, which is the output of the 3-year project. And of course, there will be an alpha edition to come, so we can ask about that as well. We all know that the early 15th century Haṭhapradīpikā is a watershed text in the history of yoga. Swatmarama, the first professedly human author of the Hatha texts, delineates Hatha as the sole method for the attainment of Raja Yoga, a delineation that is followed in all subsequent texts. The earliest dated manuscript that I believe the Hatha Yoga project, that the Light on Hatha Yoga project was looking at is a 1497 manuscript from the Sampurnananda Library in Varanasi, which is therefore not much older than the compilation of the text. But it would be great to talk about the date of the text, because in my head I've always been 1450, and I believe that the project has brought the date earlier, perhaps to 1400 for the composition of the text. So the beta edition presents the text in the familiar 4 chapters, and it derives its material from earlier sources in the Hatha corpus. The Haṭhapradīpikā has, of course, already been published in various forms. The Theosophical Society first published the text in 1893 with the Jyotsna commentary, and a second edition appeared in 1933. The Adyar Library and Research Centre edited the Haṭhapradīpikā as published by the Theosophical Society in 1972 in Madras. The 1972 edition was corrected by Ramanathan and Shastri after consulting additional manuscripts in the Adyar Library and Research Centre, especially the Jyotsna, various commentaries of that. The original English translation was revised by Bonia and Ramanathan. The Kaivalya Dharma critical edition, edited by Digambaraji and Kokaji, was first published in 1970 in Lonavala, with a second edition in 1998. So that brings us to this edition. So here the Haṭhapradīpikā has been edited and translated as part of this 3-year project, which has been a collaborative work between first SOAS and Marburg, and then Oxford and Marburg. And I believe that you consulted over 170 manuscripts. Of course, this has been a team effort, as well as Jürgen Hanneder as the principal investigator. We have Mitsuyo Demoto Han working on the team, Niels Liege, Niels Leers, Jim Mallinson, Jason Birch, and I think you have had the help of other scholars as well, and I'm sorry I don't have their names to hand, so perhaps you can say a few words on that in a moment. I was extremely grateful and honoured to be invited to join 2 week-long readings of the Haṭhapradīpikā with the project team in both the summer of 2022 and in 2023, where we had the honour and pleasure of reading with scholars such as Duaka Acharya, Jacqueline Hargreaves, Haranaga Isaacson, Shanshan Jiao, Philip Mast, Nina Mernig, Lubomir Ondrachka, Alexis Sanderson, Sven Salma, Daniel Peter Santo, and Judith Torzog. So this is, to my mind, was an extraordinary and extremely rewarding and collegiate way to read and to learn from colleagues. And I hope that Jürgen will give us kind of more detail on how this process worked with that. A few months back, the project team did launch the online beta edition at Oxford University, and it was recorded, but just searching for it this morning, I couldn't find it. But in that launch, the project team members all gave erudite and detailed explanations of their specialisms within the team. So that's a great resource if you would like further information after this. Okay, so I've already hinted at lots of questions that I'm sure Jürgen, we would all benefit from hearing Jürgen talk about this, but maybe we could start with sort of why the need for this work and how did this project come about?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here. I can perhaps summarize, the beginning of this project from my perspective. I mean, I'm not in yoga. I haven't been in yoga studies until 3 years ago, basically. And it started when I met Jim Mallinson, whom I know from my time in Oxford, at a conference, and we just agreed that should there be an occasion to make a joint project, we would just apply. And then 4 weeks later, there was an occasion because the DFG and the AHRC announced a project line. And so we applied and wrote it very quickly as usual. And I shouldn't say this publicly, but we partly did other things than were expected of us. Perhaps you can cut that out at some point. But the thing is, it was all very quick. And then it became even more confusing because then there was the Corona phase, and we knew we needed 200 manuscripts. We needed to access 200 manuscripts. The Hatha Yoga project in the SOAS had amassed a lot of manuscripts, but still we needed many more. And this is where the staff working in India came in. So we had, I think, 5 people who were looking for manuscripts doing the first transcriptions, and we, especially Jason Birch, was in contact with them. And so when it was possible in India again to travel, they traveled to the libraries and got us the manuscripts produced, usually scans, which we then could look at. And I'm afraid the process is not entirely finished. We still have a few orders open, but I hope they will not change anything to the alpha version, on which we can also talk. So I'm, in a sense, I'm the oldest, but I'm the junior in this project, because I just had the mad idea to start with yoga studies, and yeah, it was great fun.
It's great. Could you maybe sort of introduce us to, like, explain a little more about the process of doing the critical edition and the roles that the other team members played?
Yeah, the thing was very much a collaborative effort. We divided up the work quite obviously. Everyone collated something different or specialized in different things, doing lists of manuscripts and so on. But in the end, we convened, I mean, usually by video because of COVID, every Monday morning and read the thing more than once, of course. And the idea was to get a clearer picture of what this text actually is, because what we had before was basically one, let's say, Vulgate text, so the text that was edited, by the way, first in Bengal, but I have never seen the book, in 1888, I think, and then it started with the early Indian editions, which had quite a reception history. But this was considered as the text, and in fact, it was only one text. And it was the text as produced by Brahmananda, the commentator, in his commentary Jyotsna. So it's one redaction of the whole text. And since one publication of a 10-chapter version in the Kaivalya Dharma in Lonavala, in this famous series of yoga publications, it was clear that there were very strange manuscripts with very few and very many verses. So it's ranging from 300 to 1500. And so it was actually unclear what actually is the Haṭhapradīpikā. We just have one version. And so first we made an inventory of the different versions we could find. So very small one, augmented ones, very large ones, and so on. And I mean, if you want some philological details, working with 200 manuscripts is a total nightmare. You don't know where to start. If you do collate the stuff, we started collating the first 20 verses with all the manuscripts, and this gives you a small line of text and then pages of apparatus, which you can't really digest. So at some point I was frustrated and started editing the whole thing just with the manuscripts before 1700, which gives around 10 or 12, which was a bit better, and it gave basically the same result as using 200 manuscripts, which was slightly shocking. But then, I mean, I'm not telling the whole story of this. We had different phases where we used schematic software, we analyzed the structure of the text, and we put all the results together, and the result was that there is a very underrepresented recension of the work, which we call alpha recension. I think we have only 4 manuscripts so far, which transmits this recension. And this, we think, is the oldest state of the text we can arrive at. So this would be the 15th century text. The strange thing is, just to answer one of the other questions you just mentioned, the manuscript, the earliest manuscript we have is actually 1498, that's true. But this is not the oldest state of the text, astonishingly. So perhaps this was this means we could shift the text a little back. It's a bit more comfortable to allow for some time for the first reworking. But if this was an interesting compendium or well-publicized compendium from the beginning, then the reworking might have started very early. And so this might not be astonishing. I'm not yet sure how early Jim, who has said he would work exactly on that point, wants to shift the date back in time. But I think still within the 15th century.
Yeah, I think he'd mentioned 1400 to me as a possible earliest date, which seems quite a lot earlier. Thank you for kind of explaining about the process a little bit. Do you want to talk about the marmastānas? Because I thought that was a very way of approaching.
Yeah, I could. I mean, perhaps I should just briefly say something about the structure. I mean, at the moment, everyone can only read it through the beta online version. The online version is something we didn't promise to anyone, and that was just a fancy idea that came up because Niels is very good with computers. One from the Marburg team. And then we had someone in the Marburg Institute who is also very good in computers, and so they decided to write a script which would automatically produce almost automatically produce an online edition, and we wanted to try. And since we were doing that, I thought, well, let's give it some thought about the format of the thing. We should have a nice readable format, online format, not one of these over-cluttered critical edition type things, or both. And so what we have a reading version. If you click on the right side, you have a sort of version for reading, which gives you just the text and translation. And then you have a sort of study version, which gives you all the materials. And then we needed a designer because I wanted something that looked like a huge book, and in a format which gave you most of the information at the same time, including what we called marmastānas. And marmastānas, as you may know, are these points that if you press them, they hurt, according to Indian medicine. So one of the sensitive points of the body. And we use this for the sensitive parts of the text where you don't know how to read. And this is where we collated as many manuscripts as we could find. I mean, we are not collating 200 manuscripts for the whole text, but for these marmastānas, and then we can check whether we are missing anything. So this is where the text critical apparatus becomes somehow a bit too huge, but you can always ignore that and switch it off in the online edition.
Yeah, I just put the link in the chat. I'm actually not sure that I was supposed to do that in case it distracted people, but I put the link to the online beta edition in the chat, and if you click on it, you can see what Jürgen was talking about in terms of how it's presented. You kind of see the main verse in Devanagari and then transliterated, and then you have an English translation, then you have the testimonia and a philological commentary. It's not complete necessarily for all of the verses, I think, and of course it doesn't have the sort of an overall introduction to the text, but perhaps as a next question, like what changes? So this is an extraordinarily complex piece of work that has consulted so many more manuscripts than the previous editions have, and what were there particular findings from this that change how we should understand the Haṭhapradīpikā?
Well, first of all, the main changes, or the most drastic changes, are in the fourth chapter. And the fourth chapter was always a strange thing, because you may know that the first three chapters are the normal Hatha Yoga section of the book, and the fourth is the Raja Yoga section. And the idea of the author is obviously that Hatha Yoga leads to Raja Yoga, and if you formulate it in a stronger way, only Hatha Yoga leads to Raja Yoga. Everything else doesn't work. So the thing is, in the fourth chapter has its own introductory verse, which gave rise to the idea that this might be a different work, which was just glued to the other thing. And then strangely, we have versions with only 3 chapters. But and so that was a paradox, but it solved itself during the course of the work, and this is, I think, one of the interesting results. We now think that the 4 chapters form one integral whole, and the solution is quite simple. The oldest version is missing quite a bit of the 4th chapter as we have it now. It starts, I have to check that I don't tell you something wrong, but it starts with basically it omits the first 16 verses, let's say like that. So the first 16 verses come in a later phase of redaction. And so all the problematic bits, in a sense, are not there in the first version. So I think the 4th chapter in the old version is quite consistent. And the consistency is effaced by all these additions which later were added. I mean, the whole text consists anyway of a large number of quotations from older Hatha Yoga literature, as is well known. And so sometimes there's not much consistency in this text, because you have one quotation on one topic, then you have a second quotation on the same topic. They are not related. And one may be from a sort of tantric text where the addressee is the Devi, then you have a vocative, which in the tradition is then, yeah, I mean, sort of deleted by giving it other readings, because it doesn't fit in the text. But anyway, it's not supposed to be a completely coherent text. But I think if we leave out the bits that are not in the Alpha recension, in this old recension, then the 4th chapter is much easier to read. And you can see this in the online edition when it's finished, and I think perhaps even better in the printed book, which will also come out, which contains the 4th chapter in different versions.
Yeah.
The 4th chapter cannot be reduced to one text, it seems.
Yeah, and what happens to Vedroli then? Because they move around in the different versions.
Yes, no, but Vedroli is still there. That
so oldest version.
In the 3rd chapter, it's not that bad.
Oh,
so
right. Yeah.
Part of the 3rd chapter. I mean, I'm not yet clear about why the text critical wild stuff starts at the end of the 3rd chapter. But at some point in the 3rd chapter, you have lots of additions, a lot of things that were never part of the text in the beginning, and so on. And then in the 4th chapter, it becomes more extreme. So there was apparently more to change there, or more to add there. But now I see the text as a sort of handbook, which is transmitted under the name of the author even in the 10th edition that has never, that the author has never seen. I mean, like a dictionary, or like, I don't know, like Stenzler's grammar in Sanskrit, which we read in a version that's completely different from what Stenzler himself wrote. Typically like handbooks or dictionaries, which are reworked regularly.
And can you talk about the Jyotsna commentary a little bit, Brahmananda's commentary, because that seemed to be your possibly your contribution, in particular, your specialism in this area. So what's the relationship between the Haṭhapradīpikā and the Jyotsna? To what extent should we read the Jyotsna for an exegesis of the Haṭhapradīpikā, or is the time too different for us to be able to say that the Jyotsna is a reliable commentary on what's happening in the Haṭhapradīpikā?
Yeah, I'm sort of responsible for the Jyotsna just by chance. I mean, the Jyotsna was one of the things we didn't promise to the AAHRC and the DFK, simply because we thought, okay, there is a critical edition of the Jyotsna, we don't have to do anything. But when the idea with the online edition came up, we thought, well, it would be nice to have the Jyotsna alongside with the text. And so we looked at a transcript of the Jyotsna, and one of the Indian researchers started collating that, and then we found out this is a very strange collation. What's going on there? And then I noticed that whenever one checks the readings in the Lonavala edition of the Jyotsna, one finds problems over problems, and so in the end, I tried to produce an improved edition, because the Lonavala edition is really one edition which you shouldn't read of the Jyotsna. I mean, it's much better to read the Adya edition, but not the Lonavala. It's absurd because that's a critical edition, but the typesetting is highly problematic. There are, I mean, aksharas, words, lines missing. The apparatus doesn't work. It's really a mess. I can only hope that mine is better. Mine is not a critical edition. I mean, mine is just an improved edition, but one where I could read at least a few manuscripts which date to the lifetime of the author Brahmananda, which is the 1820s. And so I think we are on safer ground there. But the Jyotsna, I mean, the Jyotsna is 1820. This is, I don't know, is this almost modern yoga, pre-modern yoga? Who knows? And Brahmananda has a unique idea about what yoga is or should be. I mean, Brahmananda is a Vedantic scholar, obviously, but he thinks that his Vedantic, I mean, the Vedantic way to liberation simply doesn't work without the practice of yoga. So this is his take on what's now called yogic Advaita. I don't have enough time to set out the details for this, but it's a very interesting argument. It's contained in the commentary on 415, if anyone wants to read it in Sanskrit, but it's probably the most difficult part of the work, because the other explanations of Brahmananda are fairly simple, but there he goes more into philosophical details. But I found it very interesting, this idea that you can't change your karma without action. So if it's just a matter of knowledge, like in Vedanta, you hear the Upanishads, you hear the Vedanta, you think about it, you meditate on it, and that's it, and then you're liberated. But he says this won't work, which is interesting, because you have to do something. And this is where this physiological ideas of Hatha Yoga come in. Without them, you can't change your karma. And this is the argument is derived from one verse, or it's explained in the commentary in one verse, where it says, if you do inverted positions for I don't know how many months, then the gray hair will be dark again. So, and this means changing your karma. And for this you need yoga. And the same applies to liberation. You can't change your karma, so you can't be liberated, and especially you can't prolong your life. But because this is still one of the aims that Brahmananda probably also subscribes to, but that's not yet so clear to me. So anyway, it's not a commentary contemporary to the author. Of course not. One has, I mean, it's a few hundred years, and he's sort of halfway between classical and modern yoga, I always thought. But we have to see. I mean, we have to be open and understand this as a commentary that has its own ideas, and we still have to find out where they lie exactly.
Yeah, great. Great, thank you. Some questions are coming up. Maybe I should remind everybody that if you want to ask questions, you can write them into the chat and you can target it at Vicky, and then she puts it into a document. So go to Vicky Adenal and put your questions in there, and we'll be able to come to those. Obviously, I have heaps of more questions. Lucy, did you want to ask yours?
Thank you. Mine's really basic. For those of us who aren't right on top of the Haṭhapradīpikā right now, could you just go over what the content of this problematic fourth chapter is? Just a brief overview, please.
Yeah, that's the chapter on Raja Yoga, so meditative yoga, and it starts with definitions. I mean, in the usual text of Samadhi, it gives a lot of synonyms. And then it has an interesting description of a mudra, which is called Shambhavi mudra. And this is basically a tantric mudra. I mean, from tantric yoga. We had something about tantric yoga before the break. And then he makes a sort of tour de force saying that this Shambhavi mudra is the same as Khechari mudra. Khechari mudra, you might know from Jim Mellinson's dissertation, where you, I mean, it's mostly it's a physical thing where you flex up the tongue, and it's supposed to stop the downflow of bindu. So this is one of the classical mudras. Anyway, but he gives it a sort of Raja Yoga twist here, and then you have the stages of yoga, the 4 stages explained briefly, and then statements about the relationship between Hatha and Raja Yoga. So it centers basically on why to practice Raja Yoga, how to practice it, and then an important point is the method called Nadanusandhanam, so awareness of the sound. And this is the sound you hear during meditation, and this is supposed to lead to a dissolution of the mind. So manolaya, dissolution of the mind. And then the process is described as when the sound, so when the mind is sort of unified with the sound, and the sound disappears, then the mind also disappears, and the dissolution of the mind is one of the definitions of samadhi. So this is how this type of yoga thinks one approaches samadhi. Is that enough?
We have a question from Vikram. Vikram, do you want to ask your question?
Awesome. Hi. Just a quick one. You know, in all of the versions that you've been working with, has there been any discrepancy in terms of the number of asana or the chronology or the types of asana that is available to us, I guess, in the version that's widely accepted now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there is the longest version of the Haṭhapradīpikā in one manuscript adds a large number of asanas. So this is, but I must admit I don't have this with the moment, but there is an article by Jason Birch, which is on the sort of extension list in one of the manuscripts of the Haṭhapradīpikā. So there are many more asanas added. But this is sort of what one expects from a handbook. No? You have a handbook and you have some additions in the margins, and there you have quite a few additions. Perhaps I should say that we have, since we were interested in the earliest form of the text, and the additions that lead to the middle versions of the text, we didn't fully consider the 10-chapter version, which is, I think, a much later version, and also not the 6-chapter version and these augmented versions. So I think there is much more to do on the Haṭhapradīpikā, because it has been such a popular text. And I guess there are many more asanas list if you look at the manuscripts. There is also a lot to do about the vernacular versions of the Haṭhapradīpikā. There are, I think the Lonavala people edited just one Marathi version, but there are Braj Bhasha versions, which I just looked at yesterday. We have 2 manuscripts of that. And I guess if one would look for them, one would find more of these texts. And I think this is quite interesting, especially from an Indological standpoint, because here you can see that it's not just high Sanskrit knowledge, but something that's very much filters into vernacular literature. So this would be an interesting point to work on.
Yeah, I think obviously we have a tendency within Indology to privilege the kind of earlier and the most systematic versions. And I think you've really pointed out the importance of that other sort of work as well, to go into the vernaculars and to go into the later editions and to look at how and why they are more expanded, rather than to just kind of go for the earliest things. I didn't see if there are any other questions. Can I ask?
Can I ask just a question about these vernacular sources? I mean, these vernacular version editions. I mean, which one is the oldest? I mean, how far can we go in the past with vernacular sources?
I can't answer this really.
Okay.
One would have to make a search effort, particularly, and then hope that one can date it from the colophons. I mean, usually they. I mean, with Haṭhapradīpikā, I mean, why shouldn't they start right away? Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that would be super incredible. And because this is not my field, but would you, like philologists working with the Sanskrit sources, compare this vernacular text for, creating your final edition?
Well, if it's for the final edition, I'm not sure, because usually it's either it's a translation, or something between a translation and adaptation, or it's a translation with a commentary. And sometimes these genres are not really distinguished. But the information from the vernacular could, of course, be interesting for the
edition. The content, I mean, from a content point of view.
Yeah, too. I mean, sometimes we have, even in the Jyotsna, in the Sanskrit commentary, we have vernacular words for items of food, because the Sanskrit terms are often not. I mean, they have different meanings, and so Brahmana, in order to make it very clear, sometimes says this means this one in the local language, which is Marathi, because he was working in Maharashtra, and that in Hindustani. So it's quite interesting, and I think it would be. I mean, it's not my expertise, not at all. For people who are more into Braj Bhasha, or I don't know, there would be a lot to study. And because you cannot also predict what type of translation or adaptation you have. I mean, recently we had a conference on the Mokshapaya, which also at some point was translated a lot into different Indian languages. And one of the speakers and introduced us to a version by Kavindracharya, a very famous author in Benares, who made a sort of literal translation from Sanskrit into early Hindi or whatever version it was. And this was very impressive, because this was a sort of artistic translation into a vernacular. And then you have another translator who does exactly the opposite and makes a very paraphrasing explanation where all the commentary is basically part of his treatment in the vernacular. So one has to see. I think it's an understudied field. And I guess in yoga studies, it's interesting, because these yoga texts are often not high Sanskrit Shastric texts, and there is always the question: how near are they to the actual practitioners who may not have had a sort of school Sanskrit education? And so, from that perspective, vernacular versions should be part of the deal. So sorry, but we couldn't. And I don't read it. I think Jim could have made sense of the Praja versions, but there was no time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, but this is just the how we can expand indeed much more the field and everything. So it's really an open field, and it's incredible. And I think we have a question from Federico Squarcini.
Oh, and we also have a question from
yes. Federico, where are you, Federico?
Can I?
Yes, of course.
Thanks for setting up this really beautiful version that I have benefited by reading. And therefore I have a question. in terms of trying to link what had been said before by Philip, especially in terms of the relationship between philology and philosophy here, and precisely connecting with the idea that we have heard in the Netra Tantra tradition that to proclaim health of the kingdom, the king, the son of the king, and so on, then you need to have something to promote those kind of, no, health has to be promoted. So in that sense, I've read the portion of the 4th chapter that you were talking about, especially when you say now physiology, a strong emphasis on physiology, then you can act on physiology and transform actually what has been planned by your own previous actions. So in that sense, philology, the stress on physiology for a philologist could open the door to a philosophical understanding of what samadhi is all about. It seems to be that samadhi and yoga, therefore, if samadhi and yoga could be synonymous, as the Haṭhapradīpikā option, offered the option that samadhi, yoga as samadhi, or vice versa. So it is strongly connected, the way you achieve health and the health achieved by the way you, and therefore that's clear from the Prayojana idea. So in that sense, by reading a text of the 15th century, you can get a better understanding of what the role of physiology within the process of getting health it's all about. In that sense, it seems to me that by reading that samadhi description, the lakshana that he has, especially the Brahmananda gloss, and when he's talking about samadhi, and the idea of that samadhi can be described through a process of lakshana, stating the idea of a health, you can see that there are a lot of physiological implication there. So cognition and psychology of yoga, and therefore samadhi understood or interpreted as a psychological dimension, here it seems to be on the other way around. The body within which cognition takes place has to be addressed in a way of health in the general sense, and therefore yoga is the method to achieve that health. So it seems to me that by reading the Sanskrit text of this author, and I don't know if you have a feeling of that's why I'm asking, you say physiology, stressing the physiological point of action that the yoga could act, if it's clear. But that was my crucial, philosophy and philology here seems to touch a very strong connection, and therefore I'm asking you, being a close reader of the text, about your feeling. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I'm not sure whether you're asking the wrong person, because I am usually from that camp of meditation studies where everything is psychological and Gnostic. But in the last 3 years, it became very clear to me that this Hatha Yoga is really a completely different thing. And this was, I think, for me personally, the most interesting thing when editing this Hatha Yoga text and reading more Hatha Yoga texts. As to the question of health, I would say that Brahmananda doesn't go that far in that direction, that infinite health is an aim, like it said in the Amrita Siddhi, in the earliest yoga text, that the yogi, when he's a Jiva Mukta, he can roam the world as long as he wants, he can evade death, and then when he wants to become a Videha Mukta, when he wants to become, he wants to die, he chooses his own place and time. But because Brahmana at one point says, destruction of diseases, rogakshaya, that's all very nice, but it only applies as far as it's useful for the method. It's not an end in itself, that's what he says, or that's what he implies. It's just for ensuring that you can practice yoga properly. So he is not that extreme in this direction. But I agree, this is an interesting point, but this is really not my field, because I really come from the Gnostic field, where everything is just a form of knowledge. And in one of my favorite texts, it said that a change in consciousness is all that's needed, and everything else is just external.
We are really running out of time. Maybe we can go to Gustavo and get your question, please, and have a short question and short answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Just wanted to know if from your work, how have you understood the relationship between tapas and asana? Does the terminology change over time? Did you get any insights on this?
Sorry, I can answer very briefly because this is not my field, and I think if I would answer, it would be sort of dilettantic. But you may know that Jim Mallinson has reopened the question by lecturing in the last conference in Hamburg on tapas and yoga, and I think this would be the place where one would find the answers. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, can I just, I don't know if I'm supposed to, but thank you, Jürgen. And then like, when can we see the Alpha edition and what's going to be different about it?
The Alpha edition will have hopefully much fewer mistakes. And if you scroll further down the chapters, it's very thin. It will be a rich text. It will have all the additional text and everything. So it will be complete. This is just really a snapshot where only the beginning really works. I mean, one shouldn't quote it. If you have to quote it, just write me an email and I send you the text as it will probably stand. Yeah, but I mean, we are currently working on it, and I hope in a few months. Yeah.